Hi friends, let's do a tag video. This is the retro 80s old school book tag. It is a mouthful. This was created by C. Kritz Reed, and I saw Melinda at Web of Stories do this just a little bit ago. I copied down the questions and decided let's do that right away because this is a fun one. So I think it's an interesting experience depending on how old were you in the 80s. So I was born in 83, I'm 40. I turned 6 at the very end of 1989. So I was a very young child during the 80s. Most of my childhood, is in the 90s. But I certainly, if you were growing up mostly in the 90s, there's still a lot of carry through, reruns, things that are around still from the 80s that carried over into the 90s. As does each decade, right? Like things that were popular in 1979 didn't stop in 1980. They carry through. So anyway, basically, I think like if you're in your 40s versus if you're in your 50s, if you were a young child in the 80s versus you were kind of like a middle grade, high school, junior high age, it's going to be a very different experience for you, what the 80s were like. For example, I feel like I cannot be blamed for the 80s fashion. Unfortunately, I only participated a tiny bit in 80s fashion compared to if you were a teenager during the 80s. So anyhow, let's get into these books. Let's get into these questions. And it's kind of fun because she has them labeled. For example, the first two questions fall under Reading Rainbow, which was a big part of my life growing up. So question number 1, what book author or series got you into reading? So my favorite, I'll have to look up who the author was. My favorite books, and this might have been actually the early 90s that I actually started reading this, was called The Pee-wee Scouts. I've never heard anybody else talk about these before, but The Pee-wee Scouts, when I was really reading, and they were, kind of like chapter books, they were probably in the neighborhood of 60 to 80 pages long, and it was a co-ed scout troop, and they would just get into adventures. But the Berenstain Bears, like we're looking actually at the 80s, the Berenstain Bears were definitely the books that I was reading, being read to. I had a lot of them, and I have a lot of memories related to the Berenstain Bears. And so if we're going for more 80s style, that would be my answer. And then question number 2, what author or series got you into your favorite genre? So I don't know if I have a favorite genre, but there's two. If we're looking at like genre fiction, there's two that I can think of, maybe 3. I'm gonna go 3 different genres. Okay, so historical fiction, I would say Ken Follett. He wrote The Pillars of the Earth, and there's a whole that is part of that is the first book in the Kingsbridge series. I recently read The Mirror of Light, which is the most recent addition to that series. So he definitely got me into historical fiction. And then mystery, I would say Louise Penny with the Armand Gamache series. But also I was reading mysteries back when I was a kid. So again, this probably would have been more the 90s and the 80s. It was Encyclopedia Brown. He was like a little boy solving mysteries. So I never read Nancy Drew or the Hardy Boys. They just kind of seem like old fuddy-duddy books to me at that point. I remember seeing them like in the school library and things like that. They just never appealed to me. Encyclopedia Brown, however, did. And then fantasy, Harry Potter, it was my gateway into fantasy. I suppose I had seen The Lord of the Rings. I hadn't read it, but I had seen The Lord of the Rings before Harry Potter. Those kind of might have been concurrent as far as like when the first ones came out. But anyway, Harry Potter and Lord of the Rings would have been my entryway into those through the movies, which led then into the books. The next section is mixed tape. What was the first concert you ever went to? So I grew up the daughter of musicians. I always joked that my parents had kids because they needed roadies, but they were like classical musicians, okay? Trumpets, euphoniums, guitar. And so my first concerts were like wind symphonies growing up. That's what I would have been doing during the 80s and 90s. My first actual concert of like somebody you've actually heard of would have been the California State Fair. And it was one of those, I had no idea who this was. My friend wanted to go see this band, this like pop rock band that I had never heard of before. I don't even think they had a single on the radio yet, but you just paid for admission to the state fair and then you just get to go. And we were literally standing like at the very back because we got there too late to get close enough, but it was Maroon 5. And it was the Songs About Jane. Is that the name of that album? That was the album that they were playing. And as far as I know, Adam didn't even have any visible tattoos yet. He was just wearing a white t-shirt and he had just a buzz cut. So very, very early on, Maroon 5. And question number 4 is, what band or artist do you love but never got to see live? I've hardly seen any concerts, honestly, but somebody who I would love to see live is Foo Fighters. I love Dave Grohl. There's an amazing series on HBO. It's a docu-series following the Foo Fighters as they're creating an album called Sonic Highways. And each track they produce is recorded in a different studio in a different city across the country. And so each episode, you have kind of 2 tracks that you're following. One is, what does the recording of this track of music look like as far as, okay, Taylor's in the other room on the drums, they're figuring out the bass line, they're working out lyrics, the kind of behind the music side of things as far as creating that song. And the other side of that is basically like a music appreciation of music from that studio and that city. So what does DC music look like? What music did we get from Chicago? And then they'll have like artists and producers that have recorded music at that studio. It's so, so cool. And then the conversations that he's having with those people then inform the lyrics of the song that he's actually writing. So the one that I can always remember is, I think it's during the Chicago episode, Dave asked President Obama, what is it about American music that makes it American? And his answer is, it's like a river where we have all of these tributaries feeding in to each other and influencing each other. That song is called Like a River. So, and then at the end of the episode, you get to see, it's like his handwritten lyrics on the screen, and you're seeing like all, again, like those influences from those conversations of how they all come together to make the song. It is so, so cool. Highly recommend it. Sonic Highways on HBO Max or whatever it's called now. Also, I just think Dave Grohl is like the coolest person. And if I could have, drinks or lunch or whatever with anyone alive, it would be Dave Grohl. In my head, I'm singing this, but I'm not going to sing it for you. The next section is, I always feel like somebody's watching me. Question number 5 is, what was your favorite cartoon growing up? I mean, I watched a lot of cartoons growing up. I grew up on TV. Not on TV, watching TV, in front of the TV. Okay, first one I thought of was Inspector Gadget. I used like Go-Go Gadget arm, like pretty on the regular as part of my normal vernacular. Loved Looney Tunes, Merry Melodies. What is the difference between Looney Tunes and Merry Melodies? It was like the same thing, right? Like I don't know. So if you know the answer to that, let me know. So that's definitely 80s. But I would say this was a like spinoff from Looney Tunes was DuckTales. So that would have come out in the 90s. I was probably maybe more like 8 when this came out. So Donald Duck's family, like he had the nephews, Huey, Dewey, and Louie. It's like them, and like he's a pilot, and it's really, really good. DuckTales, woo woo. I loved it. That was my favorite, but definitely grew up on Looney Tunes, Merry Melodies, Inspector Gadget, Care Bears. My grandma had the Disney Channel, and she would always record, on VHS tapes, like the Care Bears movies. My cousins and I, my sister, we were always watching those at my grandparents' house. Question number 6, name a TV show or movie that's tied to a good memory. And I think I'm gonna go with Care Bears with that. We have like this classic picture of us as a family. It's my cousin and my little sister and I, and we're laying, or maybe it's my cousin, maybe it's 2 of my cousins because we're the same age. The 3 of us laying on the ground on our bellies with our hands like this, and we're all watching TV, and we're watching the Care Bears. So that's definitely, good memory. Reminds me of my cousins, reminds me of spending weekends, especially like Sunday afternoons at my grandparents' house. Love that. Number 7, name a movie from your childhood that you still love today. And I'm gonna go with Ferris Bueller's Day Off. I don't know when that actually came out, but I'm guessing that was more early 90s than late 80s. I definitely didn't see it until the 90s, because if that came out in the late 80s, I would have been way too young to have watched that. I remember being introduced to it by a babysitter, so I probably was too young when I did see it. And then the other one that came to mind, which was definitely 90s, not 80s, is Mrs. Doubtfire. Like that's just a classic. And then name your first TV or movie crush. So neither of these are actually going to be from the 80s, but the first one I was definitely watching in the 80s, which was actually Opie from the Andy Griffith Show. It's black and white. Like I thought he was adorable. I grew up watching the Andy Griffith Show from like the time I was like probably before I can even remember. I can definitely remember as like a 3-year-old watching it. And so yeah, he was my first crush. And then a little more seriously in the 90s would have been Jonathan Taylor Thomas from Home Improvement. The next section is Gotta Catch 'Em All. That's Pokemon. Was that out in the 80s? I don't know. But question number 9, what was a toy you were obsessed with or collected as a kid? So as far as collecting, again, this would have been the 90s, but baseball cards and Pogs, if you are familiar. Oh, I actually have it. Okay, I'm gonna be too lazy to go get it, but I actually have a binder in my office closet with like the sleeves in it, and I have the baseball cards and the Pogs and the sleeves. But the absolute favorite, and this was in the 90s because I got this for my 5th birthday from my neighbors. This is Walter. He's a pound puppy. So his tag actually, is it gonna focus? His official name is actually Wrinkles. But I didn't like the name Wrinkles. I felt like if his name was Charles, I was going to call him Charlie, or more like Chuck, right? So Wrinkles was like his official name, but then I nicknamed him Walter. So he's always been Walter, and he's just been like my ride or die guy. I can remember being a kid, having a whole bunch of stuffed animals. He was like the main one that I slept with. But if I ever like actually like cuddled with a different one, I would like tell him like, I'm going to sleep with like Teddy tonight, but like you're still my number one. So he's been my number one guy for 35 years. And question number 10, name a board game or video game you associate with your childhood. The strongest memory I have, the thing that came to me was a particular experience. This would have been in the 90s, although the show started in the 80s, and that is the Simpsons video game. So there was an arcade game, and we had Godfather's Pizza, and my family and another family, the only other Aaron that I grew up with, Aaron Jones, it's her family. We went to Godfather's Pizza together, and then the kids, we were all playing this, I think it was probably 4 people could play the Simpsons arcade game. And so depending on the character, they had like different weapons. So like Bart had his skateboard, Marge had a vacuum cleaner. I can't remember what the other characters had as far as their weapons, but it was just like a side scroller, and like enemies would come out and you'd beat them up and stuff. And then we got to like the final boss, and we ran out of quarters, and our parents were out of quarters, and they wouldn't give us any money, so we didn't get to finish the game. So it was like heartbreaking, but it was like a really fun memory. Also, I wasn't allowed to watch The Simpsons, and so anything related to The Simpsons, like it was like the forbidden fruit, and so I liked it more because I couldn't really participate in it. Next section, last section, is She's Got the Look. Question 11, name a clothing or trend that was popular when you were a kid. So the first thing I could think of is that I was like old enough to participate in was the like leggings, like the stirrup leggings that actually went under your foot, and then the slouch socks. And then sometimes too, you would wear 2 different socks, and maybe you'd wear like, you'd alternate the colors between your legs, and then like you'd have them layered and slouched. So that's definitely what I remember. And then of course that went with like the oversized shirt that you like pinned over on the side. Either you tied it on the side, or there was like these little like circular thing with a line through it that you would run it through to tie it off to the side. And then of course there would have been the hair, maybe like the sideways pony, or the top knot, or whatever, the scrunchies, of course. Like it's a whole look. So I was definitely wearing that look, in the late 80s. And then finally, question number 12 is name a childhood candy or snack you wish they still made today. So I feel like I'm the only one who ever knows what this is about, but my my grandpa was in the Air Force, and we live relatively close to an Air Force base. It's closed down now. When I was growing up, my grandma always shopped at the commissary, and they had fruit drops. And so these were not fruit snacks. You know, fruit snacks have kind of like a glossy finish to them. And they're always like characters, right? So it's like Bluey fruit snacks, or, you know, Flintstones fruit snacks or whatever. These were fruit drops. And so they were as if like, if you took like a circle and you cut it in half, so they were like half moon shaped. And then instead of being like the glossy, shiny coating, they were just kind of matte. And you can't come in red, purple, or orange. And they were so good. And it was like the thing that we always wanted as a snack growing up. And I never heard of anybody else, any other child growing up with, other than my sister and my cousins who know what I'm talking about, or my friend Brad, because he would come over to my grandparents' house when we were little, and fruit drops. And my husband would make fun of me if I ever called fruit snacks fruit drops, because I grew up with fruit drops, and they were so good, and they tasted way better than any fruit snack I've ever had. So if you know fruit drops, it would have been 80s, 90s. Let me know if you know what fruit drops are, and like let's commiserate over how much better they are than the typical fruit snacks. So anyway, that is the vintage. What is it? The vintage 80s old school book tag. Let me know your thoughts. What are some of your answers there? I'm not going to tag anyone in particular, because I feel like you have to kind of be like a specific age for this to really work. Like really, you probably have to be like in your 40s or 50s to answer this. And I just honestly don't want to think that hard or assume ages of people. So if you would like to do this, if this seems like a fun tag to you, please, fun tag to do, please do it, and tag me so I can go back and watch your video and see your answers. Thank you for watching. Remember, every day is a great day for a great day, no matter what.